Hello and welcome to a session on stepping through the Web API spec. So, if you're just joining me, I have a bunch of series that I have done. If you are joining me late, this may be your first one, and I'm going through alphabetically. So, if you're going alphabetically, this is the first one I've done. So, I'm going to be doing a lot of videos and little short blog blurb sessions, if you will, on the web API. I think it's a great thing to know about the API and the spec. And I would strongly recommend bookmarking or going to the MDN web docs if you have not already done so. They have great documentation, great tools for understanding how different APIs in the web world work: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This series of stepping through the spec is going to be concentrating on the web APIs and the JavaScript as we go through. Now, just a couple things as we begin to dive in. Some of these features are experimental. So if you see where it has this little beaker icon right there, that means those are experimental features. So I will point those out as we go through. It doesn't mean we're not going to mess with them. It just means that you need to be careful. I probably wouldn't implement them in a production app, at least at this point, in at least a robust fashion and limited fashion, maybe. It also means that it is highly volatile and subject to change, whereas other more well-established parts of the spec are not that they won't change because it's IT, everything changes, but that it's not as volatile because it's not in the experimental stage. There are also to get it to work, to get these experimental ones to work. Sometimes they don't always work in all browsers. So if you do use them, and again, I would advise against it, but if you do, you need to have a fallback. It can't be a main thing. If otherwise you may, if it doesn't work in Firefox or Chrome, then you are really limiting your reach. Now, the other thing is some of these features might require an experimental flag flipped in the browser. We might go through some that you're going to have to get into in order to see it work, to flip a flag in your browser at this point, at least at the time of this recording. Now, if you're watching these down the road, especially the experimental ones, but they're subject to change. Always go back to the docs to check it out because they may change from what I'm going to show you. So I'm planning on going through these alphabetically. If you go to the MDN docs, go to the web API, you'll see there's a ton of them. Okay. I don't plan on going through the interfaces necessarily. We'll kind of do that by way of going through the spec of the different APIs, but I plan on going through these APIs and doing a bunch of these. So first, let's go ahead and dive on in to the Audio Output Devices API. This is, as you can see on the screen, an experimental technology, and I will put a notification of an experimental API just to warn you if you're going to use it. So it also, almost all of these, they don't all have this requirement, but a lot of them do require an SSL secure. If you are not using an SSL on your application, shame on you. You need to be using SSL encryption. Now, if you're in a local dev environment, there are multiple ways to have a local dev cert. I do some .NET stuff, so there's some .NET SSLs that you can do. There's also some local open source local devs that you can do for SSLs, local CLI type stuff. So that's not the focus of this video. So I'm not going to spend time doing that, but just note that in order for these to work, you have to use a secure socket layer. So otherwise it's not going to work even in your dev environment. Okay. Now these have the documentation on here is pretty good. Let me just kind of go over, I won't dive into the documentation. You can read it on your own, but let me just give you kind of an overview. I don't want this to be a super long video. Just do an overview of it, and then I'll show you a little quick example, a little demo that I mocked up. Some of these, as you can see on the right, here's the parts of this page here. Some of these have examples, and I'll point that out. Not all of them do. The more established ones do, but not all of them. So just I'm going to try to do some of these for you. Now, when I go through some of these, I might have to mock up some stuff because the feature might be part of a larger aspect of like a web worker or a service worker or something like that. And I don't want these to be super long. I want these to be hopefully short little videos. This one's a little bit longer because I'm trying to explain everything, but I don't want these to be super drawn out long sessions. So I'm not going to be building full featured apps, just little pieces to show you how these work. So these all typically have a concept and usage. So this was with um, having to do with audio and the output. Where does that output occur? So, for example, you have here this first paragraph where it says it's from speakers. Like I'm wearing my Bluetooth headset here. I also have speakers on my laptop that I can have it play out. You may have it set where you have Bluetooth speakers in your office or whatever. So there's a bunch of ways that you can play audio. What this API does is allows the user to be able to give permission for the usage of a particular audio output device. If you've been on, this is a pretty common feature on a lot of applications where if you maybe say, like if you're doing Zoom, if you're from the Zoom world where you can go into the audio settings, you can do this on Microsoft Teams and in Slack and a bunch of things where you can say, okay, I want to set up my audio preferences. I want to use this mic, my blue mic, and I want to use my Bluetooth headphones. Or if I don't want to use these, I can change the settings to my speaker. That's a pretty common thing to do when it comes to audio settings with an application. This API allows that functionality through a web application, through a website, a web page, if you will, where you can allow explicit permission for them to use it. So all these, excuse me, almost all these have some sort of interface that you can do, like selecting audio output. That's for the media devices and element and everything. A lot of them will have security, so it needs to be SSL, secure content. The user has to grant permission for you to access that, just like geolocation or what have you. And then let me just jump down here to the example, and then I'll flip over to my VS Code and show you the example, quick mocked up example that I did, and show you kind of how it works. So, uh, in this example, they're using the select audio output within a function here. So if I go here down here to the code, I'm just going to dive right in. There's a button, an element. I'm assuming it's a button because it's called my button that has an ID of my button, and they're adding the click event. And when they click on that, it goes into the navigator object, goes into the property of media devices, and goes into the select audio output. Basically, you're asking if that exists or not, if you're able to do that. So this is a fail-safe check of, okay, can I do this API or not? So in this, if you can't, if because it's using the Bane there, if you can't do it, it's just logging out in the console log. Hey, you can't do audio output on this particular environment. So return, get out of here. Yeah, but I would recommend in a production environment, I always like to do checks like that. I would recommend something a little more robust than a console log, just because most users aren't they're not like us dev geeks where we have our console log open, our dev tools open. So I would recommend some sort of feedback within the UI. But let's say that returns true. So it will not hit that return. So we continue on, and it says, okay, let's create a audio device constant. And we're going to go into our navigator object, media devices object property, and we're going to run this select audio output method function. And then in the audio, we're going to go and we grab the audio off the page and change the source to whatever the source is and play it. And then it has a sync, what's known as a sync ID. I'm not going to get into that, but and then you can log the output details. Now, down here are the specs, and I always check, along with caniuse.com, I always check the browser compatibility. So in this particular case, This does not work in Chrome. I'm using Brave, which is built on Chromium's engine, so it's basically Chrome, but I prefer the Brave browser personally. And but it does not work in Chrome. This currently only works in Firefox. Now, sometimes when you check these out, in this case, it has full support or no support. There's sometimes where it's in between. And we'll run into some of those where it's like partial support. And so you can do some things, you can't do all things. So you can check out what can be accessed, what can be used throughout this. So I'm going to first just dive into my code, okay, and I'll show you what it's going to look like. So in here, and I'll show you in Chrome where it doesn't work, and then I'll flip to Firefox where it does work. So just nothing fancy here. I just have an HTML page where I have it linked to a JS file, and I just have a button, just a play audio button. And then when I click that, let me jump back to here and scoot this down, and I'm going to scoot my face down here. If I just click play audio, okay, now here, because it's not supported in Chrome, notice it outputted select audio output, not supported in secure context. So I use the spec way to do it here. So if I jump over, mine's a little more, just a touch more robust and a little tad different than the spec, just for my own style. Everyone has their own style, but I'm pretty I try to be pretty verbose in my comments. So hopefully this is helpful for you. So here I have just an audio variable that starts off as null. And then I go in and I grab the ID audio. So if I go back, that's my button that I'm grabbing. And I am attaching a click event. Okay. And I get a reference to that in the button here, just in case I need it, like down here, because I'm going to change the text. I'll show you that when we get into Firefox where it actually works. Then I'm checking to the select audio output. This is why I outputted in Chrome. Hey, doesn't work. So because Chrome is not supported. But here is where the actual magic starts. So first I see if there is an audio element, okay? That's grabbing this right here. If there's an audio element, then I'm telling it to, if it's currently playing, I want it to pause. And so if it's not paused, so I'm using a bang there. So if audio not pause, pause it and change my button text to play audio. Otherwise, play it and change my button text to stop audio. That's why I grabbed the button up here so I could change the text. So it's a visual cue here. And then it just returns and gets out of the function. And then here in my audio device, this is where I'm actually choosing the audio device by running that API. That's where it's single line of code, nothing fancy here. The rest of it is part of the audio API. And so here I'm saying, okay, I want to create an element. I'm creating an audio element and I'm setting that source to groovin.wave. That's my own wave file. And I'm playing it right out of the gate. And then I'm setting the sync ID to whatever device. So this right here, whatever device the user selects gets set to the sync ID, which will set it to play and it'll do stop. So I'm going to go back here. Let me just copy my URL there. And let me just open up. And I always like to open up my dev tools here. So now you, because I'm recording this and the way this is going to play, I'm not going to want to have it to go through my audio, but on my headphones or anything like that. But because I'm using those. But you're probably not going to be able to hear this, but trust me, it works. I've tested this. So I click play audio, and this is what it's telling me. Okay, as far as audio, do I want to use my Uproar headset? Do I want to use my speakers on my MacBook Pro? Uh, do I want to use? I have Teams installed. Do I want to use the whatever audio device Teams is using? Do I want to use whatever audio device Zoom is using? Do I want to use my Yeti microphone? I have no idea why that is a selection on an other than it's an audio device, but only for input. There's no output on a microphone. That's weird. And plug and play audio device. I have a like a hub plugged in, so that's kind of goofy. I'm going to choose my MacBook Pro speakers, and I can block it as a user if I want to, but I'm going to allow it. And I don't know if you can hear that or not, but I have the Groovin Wave playing through my MacBook Pro speakers. And so now it says stop audio. I can stop it. It now stops. Now, because I've already allowed it, I can actually start it again and turn it up. So, uh, really just a cool way that you can customize the ability to have the end user decide for themselves how they want to listen to whatever audio you're presenting to them. So I've hope you have found this helpful. I'm going to provide links and stuff to everything so that hopefully you can play with this on your own. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out and have fun stepping through the API.